We have very interesting speakers here from very different walks of gaming industry. To introduce ourselves, I'm Ankit. I work with Moonfrog, and I primarily handle monetization and user acquisition.
Hi, I'm Filippo, and I too handle monetization and user acquisition at 99 Games.
Hey, I'm Sailesh. I'm the VP of Games at Zynga and handle the studio in Bangalore.
Good evening. My name is Bharat Vingam. I'm the CEO of Xcube Games and also Upshot.ai, which is a user engagement platform. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Abhinash Tripathi. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called HelpShift. I'll take a little bit more from an introduction standpoint because I'm not exactly from a game studio. So we actually build a platform for CRM for games, and our customers are people like Zynga and Supercell, and there's some interesting perspectives to share about those sort of advanced customers with you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Just some interesting tidbits about the panel here. So Filippo, before getting into games, he's been working in games for the last 5 years. Before that, he was actually involved in launching satellites. So if you have questions around that, grab hold of after that. Shailesh actually loves spending time in the evening with this 6-year-old kid playing Mario Kart and Mario World 3D.
Guilty as charged.
Bharat, on the other hand, is an avid skydiver, and like his first skydive, actually his instructor was drunk, so he found out later, and it's like horror stories about that. So talk to him about that. And Abhinash actually has been in the games, has been involved in the games for a long time. He actually hacked up his first game when he was 12-year-old. He got himself in infinite number of lives, I believe, in his Bricks games when he was 12 years old. So thank you, everyone. Just to get started, I'll pretend to be a new developer and will ask you guys questions about how do I use analytics and marketing to optimize returns. So this is a problem that most of new developers face. We create new games. We come up with interesting concepts, game concepts. We come up with interesting design, get good art, and have a game live which we believe is fun. Right? What's next? What do I do? How do I use analytics and marketing to grow?
So I would say the first thing is you have to understand, where your users are coming from. So you need to use attribution, and there's a lot of tools out there.
What is attribution?
Attribution is the ability to measure installs and measure where they're coming from and how they perform, in simple terms. So it is important to, pick a tool that works for you. There are, no tool is perfect, unfortunately. There are those that are free and those that are paid. And, obviously when you're starting, it's easy to say, I'll use the free thing, but then you end up spending a lot of time in-house trying to fix the free thing. So sometimes it's better to spend a little bit of money to use even the best in class. So you have choices like names that we've heard before, like Tune, which used to be called Has Offers. And there you pay a premium price, but you get a lot of good advice and guidance, right? So that's an example of a premium tool that is really good, right? When it comes to paid acquisition, there are many channels, and it really all depends on what are you trying to do in what countries. So, the typical objective is I'm trying to make money back, hopefully. Right? But some people might say, well, I need more exposure, more branding. So the typical objective is ROI, and then you've made a game. You need to decide where you're going to focus your spend, because your game might be better in a certain geography and a little bit less better in other geographies. So you need to target those geographies. And then you need to be able to measure, how effective it is in those specific geographies, right? And some tools do it better than other tools. And then you need to think about, bidding. Do I bid on cost per install? Do I bid on cost per click? It all depends on the channels that you are using, because some channels deliver more traffic with cost per install and others with cost per click. And again, if your objectives are, I need to make the money back, or if your objectives are, I need to get to the top of the charts, maybe you end up sort of spending a lot of money on very cheap installs to get to the top of the charts, right? So there are, the scope of paid acquisition goes from, very cheap, low targeting options to very expensive, highly targeted options. And, the classic example of best targeting is the social channels like Facebook. But if you really get good at it, you can also manage to lower the cost of that. Sometimes when you start on Facebook, it's really expensive. And then eventually you learn how to tweak and optimize and lower the costs. And you obviously get very good quality from very good targeting, right? Anything else on my end?
So, Salish, you have experience with a lot of non-paid installs. Can you tell us something about that?
Sure. So obviously Zynga's really grown from the social network, right? So that's a key area that none of you should forget. So as a developer, try to obviously look at the power of social network and see how you can get more players for free from that. Which means as far as data analytics goes, you need to start tracking in terms of each player, what kind of invites they send out, how many people do they send out invite for, how many of them sort of convert. So have that sort of data analytics built in, start tracking that from day one, and then use that data to figure out how you can sort of improve from that. Ultimately, data analytics is not about the very specific number that you want to get to, but use this data to start improving those numbers, right? So the social network is one area, and sends per sender, these are sort of the metrics that you want to track over there. But going beyond from the social network, once you have one game out there, these are players who love your game, they love your brand. Try to use those players then to move them from this game onto the next new game that you have. And this is again something that Zynga does really well, where you sort of cross-promote one game from to another game, and therefore get your players to move from one game to the other game. Again, you start using data to track in terms of what kind of incentives are working for these players, and tweak with and play with different incentives. So therefore run those experiments, and then find out the right incentive that works for the largest number of cohort, and then move them on to the next game. So the cross-promo is another area how we can grow.
Sure. So how about soft launches, Bharat? Like, we hear a lot about like soft launches. Like, does that work? What's your experience been with that?
Sure, and that's I think a very very critical exercise to do. Post developing your game, because the thing with games is that you get one big chance to succeed, and there's no point acquiring a lot of users if basically they're not efficiently engaged and retaining and basically generating revenue for you. So typically, if I were to do a soft launch, then I would look at what is the largest audience for my game? Is it Far East, or is it US, or which geography I'm looking at, and based on that I'm going to target the small geographies close to that in terms of primarily culture. For example, I might be interested in doing something in, let's say if it's US that I'm targeting, I might be interested in doing a soft launch in either Canada or Australia or New Zealand or Ireland, one of those smaller English speaking countries. For example, for Star Trek we did a soft launch in Netherlands because data said that there were a lot of Star Trek fans in Netherlands, and English is something that a lot of them are very comfortable with. So so basically, that's the first thing, which country you're going to do it in. And secondly, hello, yeah. Secondly, I would advocate actually, launching it in a, under a different name, because you're not really looking at getting a lot of audience right now. you're looking at basically, you have a thesis and you build this game on you have a thesis around your game design. You basically, your game is the end product of that. Now you're validating the thesis, whether your core loop is working and so on and so forth. So what you're going to do, and what happens is if you launch it with the same name, and your app store ratings kind of go down. So launch it under a different name, but have a clear idea as to what your goals are, right? I mean, you need to have a clear plan as to what am I going to look at achieving in the first 15 days, next 15 days, so on and so forth. Initially, your first 15 days would just be to ensure that there are no defects and your app is not crashing and things like that, and you have a ton of tools to be able to do that. Post that, you would basically explore the flows of your user in the sense that, are they completing the tutorial? Are they basically stuck with, a particular, tutorial, element? And basically how many levels in the game is a typical cohort, progressing into, right? So basically you're talking about doing a lot of, fine tuning, right? In the next iteration, you look at basically numbers, right? So I'm looking at, hey, you have some, target numbers. Okay, I'm, D1, I'm going to do like, 40% retention. Day 7, I'm probably going to do some, 20% retention, etc. Right? So based on that, you have some, target, numbers from a retention perspective as well as from an engagement perspective, session length, etc. So you need to religiously tweak your product and then release it, quickly to ensure whether you're hitting those numbers, right? So once you hit some broad level numbers, that's when you need to do even more, A/B testing, right? So basically you're talking about creating different segments among cohorts, trying out different, mechanics and, things like that, and checking out what is the best mechanic that is really going to work, right? So and then comes, monetization. A small percentage of your users is going to monetize, so you'll need to match that with the type of user acquisition that you're doing and, stuff like that. So typically you spend at least 3 months to be able to go through this entire exercise and get some, reasonable results. But we've seen companies that have spent up to a year in soft launch and decided not to go, to the global app stores, right? So, thanks.
Well, okay. So I have done my soft launch. I've figured out my user acquisition, paid installs versus organic installs, viral ones versus cross promotions. What's next? Like, how do I make sure that my users are coming back to my game every day?
Clearly, retention is an important aspect, right? If not, you're spending a lot of money to acquire these players, and those players don't come back to play a game. Pretty much, your lifetime value is far lower than your cost per install. So making sure that you're tuning your game towards people to retain and come back. So therefore, start monitoring if there's a new user, what is that D1 retention, D7 retention, etc. Right? So that's for your new users. But as your game becomes older and your players are around there, you want to start looking at players who are not new users, but your existing users. What sort of retention are they doing, right? How often do they come back? Start measuring that. At some point, players may lapse and then come back to play the game again. So start looking at return users, look at their retention rate, look at their session play, look at what sort of actions they take, how many actions they take, their session length. These are sort of the data that you want to start tracking, and then start monitoring their actions, and then start taking decisions for different cohorts differently.
So if you take a step back and you think of when typically you go to a supermarket and you walk through and you're looking for milk, you're actually going through a path where the retailer has spent a lot of money to try to figure out what is the best way to get into the supermarket, walk through the supermarket, where to put stuff on the shelf. So because retailers spend so much money, if you think about it, we should also be spending a lot of time and money on perfecting what is known as the FTUE, the first time user experience, which is really that first touch point. Once you've paid so expensively to get that user in, how do you then, entice that user to stay with you and consume your content and hopefully spend money? So it's important to look at the various steps that the user takes to walk through your shop and understand through your analytics by instrumenting as many steps as you can, that every time you have a step and you lose 1 or 2% of your users, and let's say you have 10 steps and you lose 1%, then you suddenly realize that by the end of your first-time user experience, you're only left with 90% of your users, right? So you realize, what an impact it can have to have a very good first-time user experience, from the minute they walk into your shop up until the point that they, understand your game or spend money in your game. That's a very important point.
Abhinash, what has been your experience with getting users to come back to the game every day?
So I'll give you a slightly long-winded sort of answer. So all of you are game developers here. How many of you think that helping or providing a help section in your app is important? Or how many of you actually have it in your game? Raise of hands. Okay. So here's data, right? So we work with some of the largest gaming publishers. We just signed on Zynga as a customer. Supercell is one of our oldest customers. We're now embedded in 1.3 million devices. So we're serving roughly about 1.3 million customers worldwide. And from last month's data, what we found is out of 1.3 million players that we serve, 284 million people opened the help section in all the apps that we power. That's pretty crazy. That's 1 in 5 people that's using an app every month needs help. And it's the least sort of, it's the most ignored part of any app developer. They don't think it's important. They think the tutorial will help a person understand their entire game mechanics, right? And answers all their questions and they'll figure it out, right? Not true. So that's sort of what we're seeing. 1 in 5 people needs help. And we provide sort of that direct channel of communication between a user to the game developer. So all of this stuff is very important, what they're talking about, right? Being data-driven, being analytical. But there's a very important aspect of our industry which we forget. Our industry is one where we use both our brains and our heart. But a lot of us have become mechanically programmed and we've kind of shut off the heart and we're kind of focused on the numbers and trying to identify patterns when it's the simplest thing for you to do is actually talk to a user, right? So Supercell figured it out. They actually introduced sort of this in-app CRM where the users can talk back to the game developer. And so for retention, what does it do, right? So I can give you the example of Boom Beach when they launched. So we've been part of like Boom Beach all the way from when it was pre-launch in Canada through to now getting Clash of Clans onboarded as a customer and the experience. And I'll give you a small example. When Boom Beach was launched in Canada as a test, and we were part of the app, and Supercell did a very bold sort of graphics change, right? They went and changed all the graphics. I don't know if you guys have played Boom Beach when it was in beta or in test, but there was a big, bold graphics change that happened. When that graphics change happened, basically Supercell received like thousands of messages from the players, very angry on the same day the minute they uploaded the change, next minute they started seeing feedback from all their players saying, this is crap, go back to the old graphics, right? And before they could even go and analyze data, they were being told within 5 minutes of the update that we don't like it, right? If you were to process that data, it would have probably taken a day for them to figure it out. By the time it ended up in the App Store reviews, it would have taken probably a week. They had instant feedback. The next update that went out in a week, they fixed the graphics. Players were happy. Here's what happened. When they made that graphics change, that week, their star rating dropped by 2 points. So they were a 4.7 or something, and they're holding really high star rating, and it dropped to like almost 2.7, right, within a week. And then they changed the graphics back and it shot back up. So listening to user feedback is so important, and it's such a direct mode of sort of communicating to the user. I think it's something that game developers have to really embrace. And so retention it's a big part of retention, right? If players are unhappy because your graphics changed, right, and you do nothing about it, they're going to leave. They're going to abandon the game, right? That's how serious the problem is. The other thing that I've noticed is for retention, holding a very high star rating is very, very important for your app, and also to reduce sort of the cost per install, right? So if you hold a very high star rating that's above 4, then your CPIs get cheaper, right? And you're able to retain longer. Your LTVs also get higher. And one of the things that we directly contribute to the companies that work with us is to help them maintain that very, very high star rating. Because all negative reviews get channeled into a private channel of communication with the developer. Mostly the reviews that are going into the App Store are all positive reviews, right? So there are a lot of these tricks that you can employ to like keep your retention high. Along with being analytical and data-driven, you have to give a lot of importance to the qualitative feedback that you can get directly from your players, right? That's one of the keys. There are many techniques for retention. So for a new player, there are different techniques for retention. So I can give you the example of a lot of customers we work with. Some people have started embedding an inbox in the game where they start sending sort of drip campaigns to help people sort of, be in touch with their customers, communicate with them. That's one form of retention. There are things you can do to reactivate people who have dropped off. So let's say you look at like D1 numbers, D3 numbers, and you build cohorts of people who dropped off, let's say D1 or D3, you can do specific actions which are push notifications that you can send to them as long as you're able to segment and cohort to re-engage them back, right? And then there are channels, let's say they've deleted your game, you can take the extreme step of doing sort of email targeting or even Facebook targeting, as long as you have all that tracked in your sort of systems to do all the reactivation and re-engagement. So retention is, as games become bigger and monetize well and start to become successful, retention becomes really key. Just to give you some statistics, Supercell, the whole company, is about 150 people in Finland. Their player service team that services customer support requests is 1,000 people, outsourced, right? So 1,000 people work on sort of keeping their customers happy when the actual production team is only 150 people. That's how important they consider it to be, right? So that's
great.
sort of, what I'll say about retention.
Shelly, yeah.
Just wanted to make a couple of points. One thing about retention is that while you can do a lot of great things, it's also important not to mess up, right? In the sense that, how is success defined? And is it like one part of success is basically to become, very wealthy and powerful and all that. The other part of success is basically also not to go to jail, right? So just make sure that your product has good experience, right? So in the sense that there are no defects. Your whatever vision that your game designer has in terms of the the core loop and all that, it's actually executed in the game, and your analytics are basically proving that, right? And then in addition to that, as Abhinav mentioned, one of the things is it's also good to be able to get qualitative feedback and not just the the quantitative analytics, because that also helps you add more flavor to the to the quantitative analytics that you're getting. So things like in-app microservice, etc., will be useful. Yeah, thanks, Ankit.
Shailesh, what has your experience been with like product features to help with retention?
So one, as you go into this data analytics, you don't only just look at these sort of quantitative and qualitative data, but you start looking at player behavior as well, right? So let's say for a game like Farmville, for an engaged player, you'll soon find out that there are these players who play from Monday to Friday. Every single day they're playing. They're most engaged players. They're playing every single day, Monday to Friday. Then over the weekend, they stop playing your game. And then the following Monday, you'll realize that not everybody comes back. A small percentage of players stop playing every Monday, right? So that's what your behavioral data would tell you. So now you got to start forming your hypothesis. Hey, you know what? Perhaps they are finding new games over the weekend. Maybe I should get them to play every single day, right? So that's one hypothesis, and therefore you have a feature that gets them to play on Saturday and Sunday. Or you might decide that, hey, these are guys, probably their moms, their kids are going to school, and therefore they play Monday to Friday, don't play on the weekends, and then something else happens. You need to remind them to come back on Monday. Then you have an event or something that happens on Monday, you remind them on Friday, and therefore they're going to go on Friday with the intent that, okay, Monday there is this thing and I need to come back. So those are two hypotheses that would come out of your behavioral pattern or data that you see. Then you do an experiment, test that, and then see which one of them sort of holds for you, right? So therefore you start tracking that data, and then perhaps what might even end up happening is that one cohort responds to this and the other cohort responds to an event. And then you need to have data that allows you to target features to players basis their own behavior and play pattern.
So that's great. So now that we know like how can we leverage analytics in marketing to get users back on a daily basis, what's after that? Like, how do we get people to play my game more on a daily basis?
So one thing you guys are getting, right, from the theme that's coming from here, when you're building a game, it's not a race towards the finish line when I release the game. The reality is it's a marathon that starts once you release your game. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you need to do. So I hope a lot of you sort of get that point of it. And then the data that you use are sort of tools that help you take the decision as you go along your marathon from over there. One of the things that happens as your game matures and your players are playing is that the session times start changing. And as you add features, the session time would change, right? So you need to see for your game, each genre of game, as the game matures and your players become more interested in a game, more engaged in a game, there are different things, the ways that you want to really push your players. For a casual game, say a Candy Crush, what you want is still keep small sessions, but a lot more sessions. Whereas a game like Clash of Clans, what you want is that the players will play longer and longer sessions. Therefore, they should find newer people to fight easily. If that takes longer, then they're going to drop off. So you're going to start measuring those data saying, hey, this guy, if he takes too long to find the next person to battle with, he's going to drop off, right? And similarly, in the case of Candy Crush, if the game becomes really long and complex, where there are a lot of decisions to take and the slice becomes too long, they're going to drop off. So figure out what is your genre, what is your game slice, and therefore for this game slice, as the game matures, what is important, right? And measure those session times and keep those session times in control for that genre, and then enable them to play longer session times in the other genre. So sort of balance that basis the type of game that you have.
Philippa, what's your viewpoint on that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really it's art and science, right? As we can tell from all these great experiences. It's a question of finding the sweet spot in the data rather than just reading it blindly. So, you know, some things are really obvious, and often you ignore them. You know, some people say common sense is the most difficult thing to teach people. So, if it takes your users to purchase something, either first time or repeat purchases, it takes a certain amount of time, but then your average session length is much longer or much shorter, then there's something you need to address there, right? Because you need to give enough time to your users to reach a point of monetization or first purchase or repeat purchase. So again, obviously this is highly dependent on the genre, right? But you do want to consider the genre, as he absolutely pointed out correctly. In some genres, it's better to just give them more sessions with bite-sized entertainment and perhaps more moments of monetizing throughout the day. And then there are genres where, you know, you want to extend that as far as possible because maybe they will monetize at the end of a long session with a big purchase, right? So you have to kind of interpret that in the data, look for the patterns in the data, and try to understand where the sweet spot for your game is. And, you know, there isn't really a magic trick or a secret sauce to all this. You know, things that might work for 99 games, or they work for Zynga, they won't necessarily work for everyone else, right?
So earlier today you were talking about some rule of thumb for habit formation.
Right. I think one of the interesting things is trying to understand the sweet spot in terms of, you know, looking at the session length and the number of sessions per day and trying to understand when users monetize, to really understand when your game starts to create a habit, right? And where is the best moment to, you know, encourage a longer session length to get into the habit, or maybe even a shorter session length. You know, sometimes it's better to have a shorter session length to create that habit. I think it's important to notice one of the common threads of all the games out there, that they start to become, you know, habit building. But habit building can be dangerous because it can also lead to monotony and people getting bored and falling asleep and then falling off your game, right? So it's important to try to build a habit-forming game to get people coming back regularly, but it's a double-edged sword that you have to be careful with sometimes, right? Yeah.
Cool. Thanks everyone. Thanks for your. Bharat, you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that you know, if you're that 1% of game developers who are incredibly talented, incredibly lucky, who have your engagement, retention, and monetization, figured out, then basically, because you don't hit a ball out of the park every day, so you need to basically focus on doing some very good monetization as well as retention of your whales and super whales. And over there, you need to do highly differentiated treatment of your super whales, your super whales, and your whales. You'll need to do a lot of segmentation, be able to provide specialized messaging, specialized features, specialized offers to each of these guys, so that so for example on the starter game, we did some very clever retention marketing using hyper segmentation, and we increased LTV by 30%, right? So I think that's that's basically what you need to focus on once you get to a profitable game. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Thanks. Thank you, guys. So we talked about acquiring users. We talked about how do you retain them, how can you leverage the tools available. We talked about how do you engage them more, right? And all of this finally leads to people paying, monetizing more. And there are some other talks that happened earlier today to talk about more about monetization. So we'll open the forum up for questions. We have about 8 minutes left into this talk. So happy to answer any questions. Anybody has any questions?
Nobody wearing a green shirt or red shirt is allowed to ask questions. That's half of the room. Okay, we welcome questions from green shirts this time.
Yes, there are no planted questions so far. We should probably plant for it. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone, for being a great audience. And thanks, Filippo. Thanks, Shailesh. Thank
you.
Bharat and Avinash, for your time here.
Thanks for great moderation.